if you take what a lot of people, the problem I see is that we want people to think critically. People that are rich, have got rich through technology, are propagating this stuff. Like, when Sam Altman says, that OpenAI is going to create an AGI, like,
you're saying bullshit.
I'm not just saying bullshit. I'm saying fraud. I mean, that's just a fraudulent statement, right? To make.
He says it so confidently. He's building a bunker too.
Has he?
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is, like, I don't know. Sam should just have had a real job before he. Real job requires actually to do work and stuff and actually build something. And
you don't think he does work?
I'd happily debate him and talk to him about it, but I think the problem is, I think it's really hard to be a CEO. I'm a CEO, and I get told off, all the time by being, too realistic and like calling BS on everything.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard. So I think Sam is like, OpenAI is doing great things, right? Ideally, it's producing products that people are buying. Will people continue to buy those products? Well, time will tell. Will it be another, I don't know, what's some MySpace or whatever, will it die? I think if OpenAI doesn't actually create products that are going to increase functionality for humans and allow humans to be more creative and do things, then it will just die on the hype cycle, right?
ChatGPT is a pretty good start, though, right?
I don't know where I stand on ChatGPT. I've used it, right, and I use it a lot. I've used it to help me synthesize information and code and stuff. And I've used Pro. It's quite good. Will I continue to use it?
I see.
Am I happy with the fact that it is literally brute forcing the compression of our data? Assembly theory is a principled way to compress data, right? With causation. What they're doing with neural nets is just brute force.
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive, incredibly energy intensive,
yes,
and incredibly disruptive, and hooking people on hallucinations. Not quite good. Like,
yeah, why do you say hallucinations?
Well, because the way that LLMs work is they don't. If OpenAI or any of them could create a tool that would say, here's the answer to your prompt, and here is a score about how likely it is to be correct, that would be fantastic. Have you tried chatbot and say, when you say a chatbot, tell me about I don't know, a thing, and it doesn't know anything, it just makes it up.
Yeah.
It's a probabilistic return.
Yes.
So people don't...
Probabilistic, yes.
Yeah. So what people don't understand is that these systems are probabilistic generators. And of course, they give you some plausible stuff. In fact, they give you some correct stuff. So it's actually removing humanity's ability to think critically, because you get bombarded with so much information. Like ChatGPT, or the model that was used to produce ChatGPT, has read more words than you're ever going to read, but it hasn't read them. It has compressed them.
I see.
And so the meaning comes from you
Yes.
reading the words and building that fundamental idea. I want to measure a charge on an electron. What's an electron? An electron is, I want to basically understand how to build a CO2 laser. What's a laser? Well, you get this amplification process, and you're able to pump in energy, and then you get this coherence, and then you get more and you're in this exponential growth.
Yes.
And so this is what I'm saying the entire time in this conversation when it comes to doomers or or AI positivists. I'm saying it's easy to get worried about the scale at which this data is being crunched. I get that. I'm sympathetic. But don't need to make stuff up. I'll just use anti-gravity. Oh my God, we're really good at flying.
Yeah,
Look at the planes. We can fly anywhere.
Well, DARPA has anti-gravity weapons. I don't know if you heard about that.
Of course it does.
They were talking to dolphins telepathically in 1992.
Yeah, and my interdimensional portal, I didn't actually have to fly to get here. I just asked, Morty to give me the gun.
Absolutely right. I know I was going to... there are cameras. People can't hear this. Just a reminder. I want to go back to where we went on this weave with what I was starting to introduce the idea of like a multiverse or something when we were talking about the simulation itself. So let me just finish that point. I hear you on the multiverse and how it's not falsifiable, but I want to go.
Well, no, let me. Yeah, sorry. I think it might be, and I think I I don't think what Brian says sounds right, but I could be wrong, and Brian can come back to me and tell me about it. But I think that what I'm saying is David, and maybe Brian by extension, have made some assumptions that then say, oh, it predicts this, but it's indirect and quite weavy. And I would use Occam's razor and say the simplest explanation is likely to be the right one. But so I think, I don't think that, seeing an interference pattern, David would say, is evidence of the multiverse. I'm like, no, that's just evidence of loss of contingency, which is what it's a loss of information. Quantum mechanics is not magic. This is the problem.
It just looks like it to us.
No, yes.
It looks like it to me. Photosynthesis is some wild shit, bro.
No, it's all simple. It's
really simple?
Yes. Like quantum mechanics.
The light and the plants and growing and shit, that seems complex and cool to me.
Yeah, it is complex. It is cool, but it's not complicated. Right?
Yeah, you're twisting around some syllables right there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can explain to you photosynthesis. Okay. There's nothing magic in it. I think that, but with the multiverse thing, I think there are problems of labeling and ontology, and the framework in which we build our scientific abstractions, and it's fascinating, right? Because there's something very wrong with physics. With the fundamentals of physics, like wrong. And there's me, chemist, who's gone, I think I've exposed why, like, the last 500 years of physics is actually wrong. I mean, how am I not going to get fired for that statement, right? It's like, well, I am the Regis Professor of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow, and I also run a company that is basically digitizing chemistry. I'm not just making shit up in my basement.
Yeah.
I don't have a basement. But
you don't?
No, but I do have a lab at home. Where I make stuff.
I feel like every scientist needs a basement, though. You got to be able to say
next time, bunker, basement.
We'll get you one.
I'll talk to Sam, get his specs.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe he can pay as well.
That would be good because I feel like his is really expensive.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, but so coming back to the multiverse, yeah, I think there is a. I love talking to David. I'm talking to him. I've been talking to him on several occasions. We're narrowing.
Tell him I said hello.
I'm narrowing in on what I think our disagreement is. But it's hard, right? Because I'm trying to get David into a position where he will have to change his mind. He's fairly wily, but it's okay. Like, he's a fantastic scientist, a once in a generation scientist.
It's good that you guys have dialogue on that. That gives me hope when I hear stuff like that. I like that. That means he's willing to talk it out. He may defend it vigorously. He may not like your evidence, but he's discussing it.
We both share the same problem, which is fascinating. I'm like, that's so cool. Your problem with symmetry breaking in the multiverse is my problem with symmetry breaking in the universe with time. And so they're the same problem.
All right. Well, I want to come to time, but I want to go through that simulation thing to get there. So, what I was saying with if we had a multiverse or something, there could be a simulation. The reason I was saying that is because if you did have like these infinite universes, there could be some evidence that says the computing, for that to happen, there would have to be some master, for lack of a better complex term here, computer system overseeing that, almost like a video game simulation. And then you'd be able to say that, okay, maybe we do have the concept of free will, the concept of evolution, the concept of all these things that may be true in our universe, but really they're actually contruled experiments by whatever else is out there.
What's the mechanism?
What do you mean, what's the mechanism?
I mean, you said this the multiverse. So my guess is that quantum mechanics isn't what it is. People think it is, right? We need to revise quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is actually a collection of things, right? It's and so the problem with the multiverse and quantum computers, right? You think that literally you got your computation occurring over the multiverse. I don't really know what that means mechanistically, right? I can't. Am I getting data from the multiverse? No, I can't. I'm not allowed to interact with the universe directly. So when people put on these layers, what they're doing is they're taking pieces of consistent theoretical analysis and layering them on and basically making some kind of patchwork of, and when you dig down, you say, no, please give me the mechanism, explain how that works. and it falls over. It doesn't fall. It doesn't screw. It doesn't survive scrutiny. Again, I'll say again, and actually, David Deutsch is right behind this. His principal argument, which I agree, for the record, against the multiverse, is it's not. Sorry, not the multiverse. Correct. The simulation argument is it's not falsifiable. It's an infinite regress, because you have this. Well, let's assume the simulation. I'm in a simulation, but where's the simulation occurring, and where's that occurring, and where's that occurring, where's that occurring? Where, how do we know we're at the base when we're at the base layer? And I think there is a very good reasoning process he has. And this other argument, I haven't heard of this, the quantum computing one. It seems to be just like, let's just take a load of cool things, add them together, and say just because.
I mean, there could be an argument made for that for sure, and it'd be way better if Riz was sitting in my seat to explain his life's work to you. Not to say it's correct or incorrect. I don't know. It's interesting, though. But with the logic you just said for anything, I don't know if maybe I'm interpreting this the wrong way, but that would mean that there's almost like a very limited ceiling to which we can reach to actually ask questions, because you're saying we can't try to find a new floor and find a regressive explanation for that. You
could use some of it, but look, I am not an expert in the simulation hypothesis, right? First of all, right? I'm not a computer scientist. Yeah, I want to be all these things when I grow up. I'm still working on what to do. But all I'm saying is I need to figure out an experiment I would do, a thought experiment in my head. What would be the benefit of being in a simulation of a thing in the ground truth? So I've got reality and I've got the simulation. Okay. And then I'm really interested in resource requirements and how that would play out. And also the representation of things in the simulation versus reality. And all I'm saying is I haven't seen any evidence that the simulation hypothesis is even meaningful, feasible, or falsifiable. And maybe that's because I haven't paid attention, and I'll find something in there and I can revise that. But there is, I think it's you have to be careful. Things are infinite regress, a bit like panspermia, like the origin of life. Say, oh, the origin of life didn't occur on Earth; it occurred in space. I'm like, well, where then? Oh, and if you any explanation that kicks the can down the road doesn't really help you, because you've still got to say, well, where did the simulator come from? So I guess what I'm saying is, great, well done for making a simulation, but who created the simulation? And how could I work that out? And if it's simulations all the way down, then it loses meaning, right? Because then it doesn't allow you philosophically, in terms of your definitions, to start with anywhere. You're like, we're all in a simulation.
Where do you think it all started? I mean, you mentioned earlier, you walked us through, the Big Bang, and, eventually you get to Earth. It's 4.2 billion years old, approximately, life forms. But, like, do you believe in God? Do you think there's something above it that we can't scientifically explain at this time?
I don't believe in God, but I believe in wonder. I like the fact that sometimes I'm like, I have lots of different wonders in my life. Occasionally I do an experiment, and I do this is really boring actually. I do the experiment I know I hope it's gonna work. I had this idea, and if this idea is correct, the experiment will just beautifully work, and everyone else will go, no, it's not. I do that, and the experiment works. I'm like, wow, that's wonder. Then I see things that I think I don't understand, and I'm able to work them out. For me, that gives me another amount of wonder. And then also I'm able to talk to people from all sorts of areas of life, philosophy, science, wanting to do science. And they're pursuing new things through creativity and curiosity. And the universe itself is an incredibly creative place. And for me, I don't think the universe needs any more than itself. And one of the things I'm trying to explain is, like, if I could help ground or explain the transition from the physics to biology via chemistry, not only will that help humans understand how cool it all is, but we might be able to anticipate what can we do in the present to affect the future. Like, I admire people who are trying to build stuff. One of the reasons why I'm trying to build a company is I'm trying to literally grab the future and make it happen in the present.
Yes.
Right? That's all I do.
That's very cool.
Grab that stuff and actually act and do something. And if I can create like programmable computers that will make molecules and cure diseases. I've built the railway tracks or the computational paradigm for making molecules forever, and humanity will benefit from it, right? And I made that happen with my team, with the funding, with the universe. We created new stuff. So I think that I don't worry about too much because there's an event horizon I can't go back beyond. It looks like the Big Bang was an event horizon that we can't really look beyond right now. We might be able to, right? I think some very good physicists have thought about this, and Brian as well might have thought about the limits of that. But I think that there's enough cool stuff happening within our universe that we don't need to evoke external stuff. What I think is important is on our lineage of life in the universe, where we are, we have created some incredibly interesting things, from cultural artifacts to technology to the things that we are able to manipulate in our surroundings. For me, I share desire of some people that we want to make sure that the consciousness, evolution, biology, our technology can live on as long as possible, right? I don't want to say I necessarily agree with Elon, because I don't know what Elon's going to be saying next week. But I think and I don't necessarily think that making humanity multiplanetary. I think making technology multiplanetary is probably a good way to get there. But if we could make origin of life, we could make origin of life bombs and just infect the universe with life, I think that would be cool.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so I think there's other things. I'm not a creationist, but I want to be one.
All right, wait. Why?
I want to create life.
Okay.
If I create life, because I want the creationists say, I'm not a creationist. I don't believe in God, but I want to be God.
But hold on. Remove for a second God as a construct of any organized religion or how it's talked about among humans, and instead focus on God as one thing, which is that it's the all-being knowledge in whatever form that is. What is the
mechanism of God? I mean, that's again also mechanism.
There isn't, but hold on. Like, it's the one thing that had the knowledge to make this happen. And maybe the Big Bang is fucking a billion layers below what was started before that, and we can't even conceive that. Maybe it's not. Just assume for a second the Big Bang was the start. Like, you have this thing you talk about where you have wonder, so you have emotion, you have feeling, you have joy, you have sadness, you have all these things that are so innately human to our consciousness. Do you think that something, and again, you may not have the direct evidence to be able to support this, but do you think, as someone who said, like, I don't believe in God, removing how you construct God from organized religion, do you think that something that is like a God or is some form of creator, that's a better word to use, could have started this process wherever that start may have been?
No, I don't see the need for it.
So do you think, are you in the Lawrence Krauss camp that something came from nothing?
No.
So I
don't know, right? I have lots of friends who are religious. I don't look down on them. I think Lawrence Krauss takes a rather extreme view, right? Everyone has beliefs, right?
Yes.
But I don't believe in a creator with knowledge. I do believe that the universe is creating knowledge, and I want to know why.
But where does it start?
Exactly. That's why I'm asking where the origin of life is. Isn't that cool?
Yes, but like, for the origin of life to have not had some form of creator.
It's so, the God you're looking for is actually emerged. The God is a meme created by human culture. And that's kind of cool, right? God is kind of a catch-all term for helping us understand that we don't understand everything.
Yeah.
And I think the pursuit of knowledge is not an act of killing God, but an act of replacing that ghost that we've been given, because humans have got more control. But we might get cancer and die that we can't. But in the future, we might be able to say, "Oh, actually, I can intervene on that, and you will no longer die."
Why do we have death then? If there's not something that is creating us for some reason.
Not all biological entities die. I mean, the bacteria in your guts, they're 4.2 billion years old. If you think about it, the first bacteria divided into two, and they divided into two.
So
and
they
kept
all
dividing.
enter sperm?
And no, they just keep dividing.
Yeah.
So there's a link. So the bacteria in your gut are billions of years old.
Right, but it's not literally billions of years old.
Yes, literally billions of years old.
So they are in our sperm.
What do you mean?
Because for me to be created, there had to be a sperm or
No,
within the
but
egg.
when it comes to sex, so sex requires death. So, but I'm saying but some life forms on Earth, because the bacteria is spontaneously dividing, right? That's spontaneous dividing. Because I say to people, all right, how old are the bacteria in your gut? They'll say, oh, about 20 minutes, because they divide every 20 minutes. But no, like, no, 4.2 billion years old. They're like, what? And they're like, oh, there's a lineage, because that bacteria came from previous bacteria, and they're physically connected. Obviously, they're diluted now because they've, the Methudas come in.
Yes.
They come in. For you, obviously, human beings procreate by sexual reproduction. So two parents give you offspring. The parents can then die. They don't need to keep going. The fact, why do we need to die? I mean, death, you don't die if you have children, and those children carry on making children and keep going. Your lineage will carry on. The fact that you see yourself as an entity, it's just the ego is generated by evolution to stop you killing yourself long enough to have kids.
Ego is generated by evolution to stop you killing yourself long enough to have kids.
Yeah. Like
I actually agree with that.
I mean, it's just an illusion, right?
Yeah.
I want to put as many Easter eggs in the future as I possibly can. I have maximal autonomy right now.
Right.
I can control my arms and legs and I think and so on, or, and I can do stuff. But that doesn't mean that the causal chains that I set up with Chemify, with my research, assembly theory, won't live on way longer than me, right? If they're useful. They're not.
So ideas are living forms of you too.
Yeah.
And I agree with that too.
So I think that God is a kind of, I don't need God, but I need to know, or I want to know what it is about the universe that allows us to turn inanimate matter into biology. And I'm going to say, for me, the meaning of life is persistence. If you can persist as long as you can, right? And yes, humans may hack away. We may not need to die in the end. We should be able to fix aging to some degree. I don't know when.
That's what Brian Johnson's trying to do.
I'm sure. Maybe Brian Johnson with Chemify will cure aging. There you go. Shameless self-plug. But whatever. But so we have solved a lot of things through technology. It's amazing what we've done. But yeah, there's no need for God. But we don't need to tell people who believe in God they're stupid, because that's not helpful and also not true.
Sometimes I wonder if the greatest, I guess like the greatest trick ever pulled on mankind is that science and religion are in opposition to each other. Because even let's go with the definition we've laid out of science all day, which is that we're constantly finding new ways to think we're right about something later to be proved wrong on the road to eventually be proven right. Simple way of putting it. Could be the same thing with religion though too. And both, the reason I say it's interesting that they're put against each other is because both are seeking the same answer. What's the origin of it all? What is our meaning? And why are we here?
I don't know if that's true. I think they should. So I think religion is basically a meme used by people. It was a technology to control. And same like what people are using right now, right? Technology to control.
I think there's arguments for that. Yes.
And I do think that the fact that people have kind of falsely or maybe inappropriately taken their wonder and put it into religion is a failing on humanity, failing. And that there is an opportunity for us to say, I mean, religion is actually a really bad thing, right? Religion that puts cultures in conflict, and that
it can be used to be a bad thing.
Yeah. So the idea that we have these religious factions and they have different cultural standards, and not all humans are equal in these religions, right? It's just, for me, I want all humans to have equal rights,
sure, absolutely,
irrespective of any physical attributes, right?
Yes.
So I think that's a really good thing. And where religion kind of pits people against themselves on that is bad. Now, the fact that maybe in science that we are not very good at allowing people to ask the wonder questions.
Yes.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
Gives space for religion, but we should, in Eastern philosophy, certainly a lot of that is quite good. So I think that that if you replace religion with, I don't know, my religion is curiosity. Like, why does that happen? Why does it work?
Yeah.
What's the question? I want to keep asking questions. I don't think religion asks questions. They give you
Dogma.
they give you labels and things.
Yeah.
So I don't think religion is asking the why question. It's just telling you. So I think religion is anti-curiosity, and that's why I have sympathy for Krauss and for Dawkins, because they find religion a kind of another way of stopping you from being critical, being a critical thinker.
It's also how you behave with it, though. I always say this. The majority of people I know who are involved in organized religion use it for peace and good in their life and are good people because of it, which I think is awesome. I'm going to call them we'll even be like liberal with our terms here. I'm going to call them the 90%.
Yeah.
What human history has proved to us, though, is that maybe it's less than 10, but just for the sake of round numbers, that 10% that uses it for power, for control, for absolutely sticking to dogma and saying, no, you can't ask any questions about how this is written because that's the way it is.
Yeah.
That's where we have all the problems. And by the way, that's where all the wars, the fucking fake fights for power happen that cause terrible things in the world. And that's why I also have some huge problems with organized religions like you. I just find it sad that like something that could be used, even if it weren't right, could be used for goodness, for someone to live out a good life while they're here, could be taken advantage of by a powerful few who then ruin it for everybody.
Well, same with what we see in social media and so on right now. And the other thing I'd say quickly is that the interesting thing about there are people who are spiritual and curious, and science hasn't given them the answer, and they go to religion or have that type of dialogue. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with thinking about bigger things and what is there beyond our material reality. What I personally think is there's nothing beyond our material reality, but there are really interesting things that happened in our material reality which are amazing. You know, I think I like a quote of Roger Penrose where he says, "I'm a materialist, but I don't understand what the material does." Right? So Roger thinks that the brain is also, that consciousness isn't computable, but he's kind of pulling all kind of weird mechanistic stuff because he lives in a universe where time doesn't exist. And when a universe where time doesn't exist, you have to invoke collapse of the wave function or some other thing. I think it's much simpler than that. But the fact the universe has produced objects that can ask, that the fact the universe can itself think through us is mind-blowing. That's for me, how did that happen? I want to know why, and I want to answer that question, or I want to contribute to a body of thought, help that happen. Because if humans can help position themselves into where they exist in the universe, what our culture is doing, and we can understand how technology and philosophy and science interrelate, we're going to basically have an incredibly interesting future.
Yeah.
Because, we're going to understand how evolution works. We're going to understand why we want to go to war occasionally, why we want to do these things, and how we can replace those things, right? Human suffering does not need to be a necessary future for us. We do not need to have wars in the future.
Agreed.
The fact we have wars right now, and we have equitable distribution of resources, is kind of weird given that we can make so much stuff. There's not a shortage of food on planet Earth. There's not a shortage of fuel. There's not a shortage of anything, really.
But who gets a hold of it? There's, as you said, a distribution that currently is not sustainable if it continues as it goes.
But that's the beautiful thing about that lack of sustainability, is it creates problems to be solved, which allow us to build new technologies that make us more sustainable. We have this hierarchy of things. Like the fact that machine learning right now uses these horrible data centers that just chug it out and heating up the planet, and everyone's like, we need to spend $3 trillion on energy. It's like, no, should we actually just develop a new architecture? Because the human brain is pretty good at being intelligent, and it's like uses less than 20 watts, right? And so we'll get there. And I think that what we shouldn't do is demonize people for burning fossil fuels and do it for progress, right? I really don't understand. My job as a scientist, as a technologist, as an entrepreneur, is take knowledge and create cool stuff that's going to help humanity and create value.
Absolutely.
So
that's a good way to look at it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's also like a problem of people want the answer to be the extreme on everything, and that's what the internet's done to us, right? So it's not enough that like, okay, maybe we're doing X, Y, and Z wrong with fossil fuels. No, we got to ban all of them. You know, and something has to change in our society. That evolutionary process of how we use the internet has to change. Like, I look at it this way, and maybe this is an oversimplified way of looking at it, but, you know, when it comes to the internet, whether you're an 18-year-old or an 80-year-old, we're all just teenagers. Like, Internet 2.0 really started with Facebook. You could say MySpace, but let's say it's like that 05, 06, 07 area. That means that here in 2025, people who were 0 years old using it, which was all of us, whether it was your grandma or a kid, we are all 18 years old now.
Yeah.
So we have not matured in how we use this tool and how we work things out. And I think as we mature, people will start to see some of the errors and patterns. Like, I've seen a step back in just outright cancellation of people because people got very sick of like just automatically canceling everyone the minute they say something wrong. Not to say it still doesn't happen, but like, it's not like it was 5 years ago when we were 12 and 13 and just saying, fuck this. You know what I mean? So maybe there will be a change there that could be for the good.
Yeah, I look again. It was we talked earlier about the printing press. Initially, what was printing press? Print Bibles. You know, what's the internet used for? Manipulate people, right?
Yes.
Hack your dopamine. I think that some. So I think we'll all agree that smoking is bad for you, right?
Yep.
And smoking, you know, gives you lung cancer. It gives you heart problems, right? All sorts of problems. So I think that we're going to find in maybe 20 or so years' time that the way that we use our social media consumption, TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever we want to call it, is going to be found as to be so bad for our psychological well-being that it will probably actually ban it, right?
Ban it.
Well, like in the UK, we banned smoking, right? In public places, and now we've banned smoking for. I think there's like my son will never be legal for him to buy cigarettes because they've changed the age so you phase it out, right?
That's a product you use though that is detrimental for your health. Not to say your point about social media being detrimental for our health is bad, but like it involves speech. So don't you think that's an issue?
Well, this is the thing. We're gonna have to evolve it. So like the way that is nicotine bad for you? Well, nicotine's toxic, but you can deliver it in different forms, which are safer, and people like it, right? So I don't think vaping is much safer, but it might be better. I don't know. But anyway, so the problem what we have with social media is the way it hacks our different systems, right? Our instinct systems for reward, right, and attention. These things, you can show that they're hacking and they're affecting people's psychological abilities, right? So there will be, people will start to say, well, do we want our kids to be hacked? Do we want to be manipulated by social media? How do we create an environment where we have access to these tools, to the fun things? Like, I bought YouTube Premium because I got fed up with my kids just watching all the adverts. There's so much content.
Game changer.
So much content on YouTube. It's like, if I want to fix anything, I could read a manual. I could just type into YouTube.
Or go to YouTube.
Yeah, it's like, it's fantastic. Like, it is a revolutionary tool.
Yes.
Right? So, not to say there's not daft stuff on there, but I'm not saying YouTube is perfect, but it's quite good.
Yes.
X has become horrible to use because basically it's completely unfiltered. But you can, if you pay attention to it's like, no, I don't want to see people getting shot all the time. Please remove that, right? If you can, so there's things you can do.
And self-select.
And so I think the question is, how do we help people have a much nicer psychological environment? Because these tools are doing real harm. But again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an educational psychologist. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm a chemist trying to find the origin of life.
Yeah.
But I do agree. But I am fascinated with the emergence of new technologies and how they affect our society. And I think that we will deal with that. I think right now we've got a power struggle going on between, regulation, I don't want to feel bad about burning fossil fuels. If you're going to regulate and say, well, don't burn fossil fuels and make it illegal, then fine, I'll comply. I want to obey the law. But until you make it illegal, I'm going to burn as much fossil fuel as I can. And why am I going to burn it? Because I'm going to generate knowledge. And if you allow me to generate knowledge by burning fossil fuel, I might just help generate the next technology that allows us to leave fossil fuels behind.
So that's what I'm saying. So then banning it, that's an argument against the regulation of banning it, no?
Exactly. You don't want to regulate against it. What you want to do is you want to manage risk, right? The risk of CO2 in the atmosphere increasing, the temperature on the planet to such that you're going to have mass migration. Look, the good news about CO2 increase is we're going to have more, the planet's going to get greener. There's going to be more life on Earth, not less. Bad news is we probably have to all move to northern Siberia. And I'm like, that's a lot of people, right? And there's gonna be water shortages, and we just need to think sensibly about how we're going to clean up the planet. Right now, we don't have enough energy to remove the CO2 from planet Earth, but when we get to fusion, we'll be able to fix all that CO2 because we'll have enough energy to do it. And then we'll be able to think about where to place it. So there's all these different structures. Like, Victorian England was a horrible place in terms of coal and air pollution. But we cleaned it up.
Yes.
We got there. There were new technologies. So again, we have to build new technologies as fast as we can. Like what I'm doing with Chemify, just building more molecular technologies. Cleaner ways to make molecules faster. Great. So I just think...
innovation win.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot to be done there. But, I have so many day jobs, right? One of them is probably not being an arbiter of how our culture should evolve. But I am part of the culture, and I am thinking, and what I am just saying to everyone is, please let's enable each other to think critically. The gift we can give each other is the ability to think critically and not just make stuff up because it sounds good.
Yes, and I think, again, to your point, as we mature with these tools we've been given, there will get to a point where people will eventually see the chickens come home to roost on those who just throw around things that make no sense. And eventually you'll have enough movement where people break with that later and say, wait a minute, they said all this stuff was true and it's verifiably not. That you will form people who are like, maybe I shouldn't just look at 280 characters and make a determination of what someone thinks. Not to say I'm going to go suddenly be some expert reading all the peer-reviewed papers that are written sometimes in another language, but there's a middle ground there.
Yeah. I have so many people who use my X account as argue with me, say, "Oh, I thought you're a horrible person." And I'm like, I just tweet random things to make it to offend you into thinking, right? I'm like,
I just tweet random things to offend you into thinking. That's a bio. You should make that your X bio.
Right, yeah. I mean, I try not to so much now because X is pretty noisy at the moment.
It's very noisy. Yeah.
And also, people, I think, went through the pandemic when we went through quite an interesting shock during the pandemic. But I don't know. It's fascinating to watch. I think that we need to stop overgeneralizing on some things and let humans generate new technologies and take it from there. But I don't know. Maybe I should make a new type of quantum teleportating computing.
You'll get there.
Multiverse.
After this raise, you'll get there.
Yeah, exactly.
We put a pin a little earlier in time. You started to talk about that, and then we didn't get into it. How people have some, especially like scientists, they have some interesting theories on this. You mentioned Sir Roger Penrose, and I think you said it doesn't exist. What is your theory on time and what it is?
I mean, I guess I can answer that. If you want, we can go to assembly theory, because if you want...
If it's a part of it, then yes.
Yeah. I mean, assembly theory is kind of for me, it helped me get where I am. And I mean, I've always, since I was a kid, felt that I'm existing in a flux of time, right? And and for me, time is non-negotiable. It's just, it's not a coordinate. It's an action, right? It's the process of change. And I think in physics, the way we label things, again, we lose something, the way we label things in language. But it's probably better to come at it from assembly theory, because I think it naturally leads to a new conceptualization that anyone can understand and actually kind of, it opens up a new way of looking at the world.
Okay. When did I'm trying to think the order we should do this in. The two questions would be, obviously, can you define assembly theory as best as possible for the layman to understand? And secondly, whether you want to answer this first or after you answered the first one, how did you come up with this? Was this like a long time thinking about it and it kind of morphed into, oh shit, or was this like a aha kind of moment?
I think both. I mean, like I say, I've only ever had one idea. It's just no one's noticed. I was always fascinated by the spirit in the object, this kind of, things have and I didn't realize I was solely poorly educated and also didn't read enough philosophy, right? I think, Leibniz and Henri Bergson and a few others kind of basically saw the ghost in the machine. But I'll tell you a story about when I was younger, I became obsessed with survival kits, a bit like Sam on Altman building his bunker. I wanted to go one step further and say, look, what is the minimum amount of stuff I would need to reproduce my technology so that I could live comfortably? Now, let's not think about microprocessors and ChatGPT and all that stuff. But what I mean, how could I produce my own pharmaceuticals, clean water, food, tools, shelter? What would I need? And so, like, basically, how I could have a list of things that I would need. And then, critically, I'd also want to make sure that they would be perpetuating. Like, I would need machines that would allow me to make the machines that make the machines. Yes. So it's like, so what is the minimum I need, right? The minimum amount of stuff I would need to basically have a self-sustaining society for Lee. And then I thought, okay, that's cool. I can imagine that. It's like, now how could I compress that down? Because that's quite a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And so, and I remember I had this survival book on how to survive. And then I thought, I could have this massive, farm and food and equipment and, forest and all this stuff and water and and I was like, well, why can I compact this down into what I can put on the back of a truck? And then can I get it into a briefcase? And then I go smaller into a case. And then how could I get into a matchbox? And that was really the invention of assembly theory. Because in the matchbox, I guess, looking at it, is why I became obsessed. In the matchbox, I was like, what is the minimum set of tools I could use to make other tools, to make other tools, to make other tools, to make other tools, to recreate my way of life now? So what is the minimum I would need? And that would interact with the environment as given, pretty much anywhere, so I could just survive. And, it was a razor blade, a mirror, maybe some cable, just all these things I could get together. So that was kind of really, in a way, assembly theory is just a way of saying, what is the minimum amount of stuff I need, amount of knowledge or things or objects I need. When I combine them together, I can generate other things that will act back on the chain to generate other things. So it's this recursion within a line. So it's a bit, so the assembly theory in one line just basically says, the past matters. But I'm like, okay, we probably need a little bit more information than that. So what I mean is, like, every event that is occurring has some function of the events that have happened in the past. I call them contingency, right? Okay. So, and then the things that happened before that. And if you could map that and put it on a line, on a graph, and count the information required at each step to make the next step happen, you would be able to kind of explain the mechanism where you could go from something to a quite complex object. So that's kind of assembly theory in a nutshell. Now, how I got to it was I flipped the problem around, and the problem was this, that I'm obviously want to know why we're here. Well, that led me to origin of life. That led me to understand how did life get started. But then people started kind of getting trapped in defining life. Like, life needs to be this. It needs to replicate. It needs to have a metabolism. It needs to have error correction. And you got all this list of requirements for life. And I was like, gee whiz, that's a really long list. And everyone was arguing about what the requirements are. And I was like, is there one thing that life does that non-life doesn't do that would allow you to tell that a system was alive or not? And it's and then another one line to unpack, which I think was a guy I met at a conference, a guy called Adam Savage, I think. Okay. Mythbusters guy. Yeah. And I was telling him about assembly theory for an afternoon. He's like, what you mean is that life is this thing that creates complex shit at scale.
That's actually not. That's kind of along the lines of how I was picturing.
Yeah. So what I was doing, I said, oh, you've got all these things you call bit of life, right? What life does. And I'm a chemist, and I asked myself this one question: how complex does a molecule need to be before you go, that molecule could not have formed randomly in the environment without any process of evolution or technology?
Meaning you're not going to the lowest level, you're going to the lowest level of what we can define.
Yes, I'm defining like the molecule as a complex enough object. Now, at the beginning, that really confused people because the physicists went, no, hang on. In a finite universe, so I have to get this right because I'm probably wrong. In a finite universe where you have infinite time, every state is searchable. In a finite universe where you have infinite time, you can go to every single possible combination. That's what the physicists say.
Okay.
And I say, for me, my intuition was like, no fucking way. That's impossible. You can't do that. And the physicists are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, why are you saying it's impossible?
Well, of course you can. You have a finite universe, finite, and you have infinite time, infinite. Look. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But that doesn't actually happen, right? So then when I realized, if I then qualified it and said, look, as a chemist, the reason I viscerally felt this, I really had to do this over a number of years. I realized that when chemists measure molecules, they don't measure one molecule. They measure a large number of identical molecules. They have to. That's how the technique works.
Yes.
It's like, So what I mean is, if I have a complex molecule that I have a lot of copies, and I know I've got a lot of copies, there's going to be a threshold at which I have so many copies and it's so complicated, it can't possibly have assembled itself by chance. And like the example you could use would be an iPhone. Like if you go to Mars and you find 1,000 iPhones, or if you find 30,000 Teslas, or you find, like all of Van Gogh's paintings or something like this, there's going to be a threshold when you go, this did not randomly occur. And that was the birth of assembly theory. So then what I did is I then suddenly said, then I took this stuff and I said, well, how can I measure complexity in molecules? And I found a way to do it using what chemistry used, spectroscopy. So spectroscopy is a process of shining light on things, and you can then basically, the molecule absorbs the light, and the more parts the molecule has, the more colors it absorbs, because of the rules of quantum mechanics. Yeah. And so that's where assembly theory came out, and basically we came up with the assembly equation and worked out that suddenly, if I can take a sample and I can find a molecule that has more than, say, 15 parts in it, and I can measure it in the lab, I know the biology produced it.
So are you saying that this would be going towards explaining creation itself, because you're going to the molecular level and saying there are unique molecules that we can prove in a lab, that because there's now a bigger supply of them, we know it had to come from that, meaning like it's selected for that molecule and expanded.
Yeah. And then it will basically look at what is a minimum configuration, where you literally put atoms in, individual atoms, or a lot of atoms that aren't many bonds, just simple stuff, and you get complex stuff out. Like the cell is literally a complexity generator. It just builds stuff, right? It doesn't infinitely build stuff because you don't need it, or it's just enough for the combinatorial space. But there's a lot of features on this, right? It's so deep in that. But I had to start somewhere. So, and remember, I was kind of doing this a lot on my own, and then a lot in collaboration with Sarah Walker and her team.
When did she come in?
How
many years into the process?
Well, I think I kind of materialized so I would say I went back to my childhood building survival kits. So it was always in my head. And then when I was going into the origin of life stuff and artificial life stuff, and everyone was arguing about defining life, and NASA wanted to define life so it could go measure it, I was like, there's something else we need to do here. And I think I started to do that about 2014. I met Sarah before then, and we did she organized a conference on reconceptualizing origins of life. But I met her before at a NASA meeting where she was talking about information and life. And she's an incredibly interesting speaker in that she speaks very fast. She's incredibly articulate, but she abstracts in a way that you know that you're being told something interesting, but you don't really understand
what the fuck it is.
No. It's much more elegant than that. It's really interesting. And then when I met her, I was like, I have no clue what you're talking about, but it sounds good. And she was like, what? And I'm quite a critical character. So people, I think, knowing our collaboration, think it's quite funny because like, how can you guys possibly work together? Because she is really nice and very articulate and you're just super critical. And I'm like, no, but that's not exactly how it worked, right? I knew that Sarah, from listening to Sarah, she understood there's something missing in physics. The physics we have right now isn't sufficient to explain the origin of life and how life works. And I knew that the origin of life people were trapped in a series of dogmas. And then so we started talking, and then we wrote some grants together that were funded, and our team started working together. Assembly theory was coming through at that time. I kind of invented it with I actually invented assembly theory with an administrator in my group.
An administrator?
Yeah.
Not even one of the scientists?
No.
You saying invented the name or invented the actual?
No, and did the work. Like, so I was like, almost a sucker for
smartest secretary I've ever seen.
So this is the guy is my financial admin guy. I hired him, and I was talking to him one day, and he was telling me, I'm not sure if he would want me to say, but probably it's okay. I probably won't mind. But it turned out he has a degree in physics and math.
Convenient.
And I was like, why are you just doing that? Come on, let's talk about science. And he was like, what? And so anyway, I was building the concept for assembly theory, from a chemistry experiment, like chopping up molecules, and I'm building the algorithms, and he had a go at writing the first algorithm with me, and he actually got the algorithm wrong. It was pretty much there, and we were arguing backwards and forwards, and then we got the algorithm a bit better, and then he actually started a PhD, I guess a year or two later. He got his PhD.
Okay. So he made the shift.
Yeah. He's still doing financial administration in the group, helping me get the but he also does research now as a postdoc.
What a story.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But then in that, then Sarah became involved because I realized that actually, although I invented it, I mean, what does that mean? I'm like, well, probably Sarah also invented something similar, if not the same thing. Mm-hmm. But I guess who cares who invented what? We both saw that there was a problem that needed to be solved, and science is about problems. Sarah saw there was a problem in physics with information, and I saw there was a problem in origin of life with dogma and defining life. And that's how we started working together, and our teams have been working together ever since on that. And it's kind of interesting because, again, our teams are like slightly different cultures and slightly different interactions. But
that's good. You need that.
Yeah. I think Sarah's team are beginning to realize that I have strong views, weakly held. so it's because they're like, Sarah says, well, I think my team will want to do this, and they're worried about what you think. I'm like,
fuck that.
Who cares? I mean, as long as they could explain to me what they're doing theory wise, and there's some, there's lots of things in assembly theory which are kind of I have a very strong intuition for, but I wasn't able to explain. So, like, for instance,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Let me give you one thing, which is kind of mind blowing even now. So, when you have a molecule and you chop the molecule up, the molecule, there's a shortest path to make that molecule. So that means if you have all the parts, let's say you make the molecule and it has, all these different bits, you can chop it up, but then there is a really convenient way to make the molecule on the shortest path. And for me, the shortest path was really important. And my team were like, no, it's the average path. I'm like, no, it's not the average path. That's nonsense. It's the shortest path. And the reason why the shortest path is important is you can measure the shortest path. It's not possible to measure an average path very easily, right, with a molecule, because you don't know all the construction ways. But there is a threshold where you can have no shortest path. You can't go below a shortest path. So that kind of was really interesting. So I guess the assembly theory says, hey, complexity doesn't arise by chance when you have it in abundance. You have the assembly equation, which explains that. There's this thing called the assembly index, which is the number of steps you take on a graph the shortest number of steps using the building blocks to make the object. So whether the object's made out of Lego or letters or molecule or atoms and bonds, you can do that. So, and that's how we've been working on assembly theory. But where time comes in...
Yeah, that's the fourth time today you did it.
Yeah, time comes in is like we realize that if I've got a molecule and the molecule is quite complicated, and obviously we know the molecule was made by evolution. Let's say take a molecule like Taxol, which is a natural product, a secondary metabolite made in the Pacific yew tree in the bark. Just happens to be quite a good anti-cancer drug. It's devilishly complicated. It has lots of chiral centers, which means it has handedness, right? It has left-handed and right-handed things in it, and it has this very complicated kind of structure. It would take a while for a chemist to make it. The enzymes in the Pacific yew tree can make it. It's great, right? But it's one of those molecules that can't form by chance in a random universe in any abundance. It would take too long, right? Okay. Even if you have it, finite universe and infinite time. Having Taxol together in one small volume, it's just not feasible, right? Good. And so, I then kind of imagine that now we can just take that molecule out and just imagine it can exist without life. You can then, the assembly index tells you how unlikely it is. So now what that means is, like, if I do all these combinations together, it also gives you a fundamental limit on the amount of time that needs to have passed to make the object. And then I was like, okay, now I've got this. The Taxol is proof that there was a history, causal structures, enzymes, and evolution. And it puts a time limit on how long it took for that to be made, right? And so what I suddenly realized is that evolution requires time. In biology, of course. But if you go to physics and say, evolution requires time because there's contingency in history, the physics are like, what? Well, there's no contingency in the universe.
Why did they say that?
You have to talk to the physicists about this, because they say that it's immersion, and they use all these words, because in a universe in physics, there is no time. Right?
See, that's never made sense to me. It's like, how do you explain then? I could see if you were getting to some of the stuff that you say is not falsifiable. Like if you got to some of the multiverse and interdimensional stuff, okay, maybe then there's an argument that time is just like a constantly shifting thing. But if we're dealing with what we can falsify and with what we can see in this universe, I'm talking right now. In a second, you're going to respond and talk. That is categorically after.
No.
What I just did.
Say in the block universe. So Bertrand Russell, you might want to get Bertrand Russell up and try Bertrand Russell and causation. Bertrand Russell
he looks like a G.
A famous phrase where he said, causation is like the monarchy, looks good but isn't needed, right?
Looks good. Interesting.
Right, because Bertrand Russell was a logician. He actually was a really good mathematician.
A logician?
Yeah, it basically used logic and mathematics. Yeah. And he wrote Principia Mathematica, right? And that was going to be the book that explains all the universe and math.
Sounds
and
smart
then Gödel came along and went, no. And what Gödel showed is that that mathematics isn't a closed system. It's very complicated and very nuanced. And it's basically about...
What does you mean closed system?
It's about understanding how to prove something and if something is true or not. And it basically explains the way that layers in language work. It's quite interesting. But if we go back to causation, physics think that time is a coordinate, that you have this thing called the block universe, and you can go forward in time and you can go back in time.
Meaning we could time travel.
That's what they
hypothetically.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? So what physicists say, if physics is deterministic, then basically our conversation right now was preordained by the Big Bang.
Yes.
Right? So we're not creating anything new. What physics cannot deal with is creativity. And this is why computation based on physics, using LLMs and all that stuff to distill out creativity, this is why this argument is kind of come
full circle,
quite large right now, right? Because of course, if you know the history, you can machine learn on it. You can milk the history. but you still can't predict the future. So now this is why you have this interplay of different things. So assembly theory says, hey, complicated things can't just in any abundance don't just happen. They needed a history. That history is captured in what we call causation, right? And we make an assembly space, right? And in assembly theory, we have 4 universes. The first universe is like the universe of everything. Like everything is possible in this universe. You have infinite universe, infinite time, infinite space. So all possible configurations can exist. But we don't see that. That's a combinatorial universe, right? Even the laws of physics in the assembly universe, they can have all different laws of physics. Then you have the assembly possible. And that is like, okay, given the laws of physics that we have, what objects are allowed, right? So assembly possible says like, the quantum mechanics has these energies, there's all this stuff, right? Carbon can have a certain number of bonds, blah, blah, blah. So you can have combinatorial access to the universe. This is like now there's no time in this universe. You can just literally pull on every object in the universe and put it together. Then you have so you've got assembly universe, everything, assembly possible. Then you've got assembly contingent, which is like, oh no, you can't just have objects that were made way at the end of the universe at the beginning. That's cheating. You've got to do the work. You've got to do the time. So assembly contingent says not all objects are available at each point in time. You have to make them. So the first time you make an object, you have to go through the steps to make the object. And then you have the final universe, which is the universe that we live in, which is assembly observed. So that means you can make observations and go, oh, these complicated objects, they required a certain amount of time to get made. So if you take, say, like some of your technology here, if I was to reproduce the technology, how much time would it take? What is the shortest path to go from sand to a microprocessor? So what assembly theory basically says is like complex things in abundance aren't spontaneous. They require evolution to make them selection or technology. And technology is connected to evolution and selection, number one. It says that also complex objects have an amount of time you have to go through, a number of things you have to do. That's non-negotiable. Now, you can have different buds of time where they're not interacting, right? Just like different, you just want processes to occur. And then assembly theory says there's these assembly spaces where you can imagine these objects, what they're going to do next. Now, the assembly possible to the assembly contingent is very interesting. The assembly possible, actually, by the way, is the same as David Deutsch's constructor theory.
It is.
The assembly possible basically says all transformations in that universe are allowed to act on things and you can make stuff. But that assembly possible is a universe with no time. And constructor theory, which is a way of instantiating quantum information, actually, in the universe and making computation fundamental, says that you don't need any time. But again, if you need time, then because you don't have access to the future, you don't have infinite resource, it says that the universe itself is not computable.
Wait a second. Access to the future meaning you can't go there right now, but that doesn't mean that the future is not going to happen.
The future is dependent critically on the past, right?
Yes.
And if the universe is expanding in time, the only way you can get to the future is actually by doing the operation, by going to the future, by allowing it to happen. Whereas the computationists say, no, I can simulate it. And physicists say, yeah.
So that's why they say it's infinite.
Yeah. So you have this interesting, the argument we're having is that, time doesn't exist on one hand, because you've got, if you think about it, the Big Bang, what are the 4 things that physics need? They need order at the beginning. So somehow the Big Bang was magically ordered and all the things that were going to happen in the future were encoded in the Big Bang. So this is God. If you're a classical physicist today, you are religious, I would argue, right?
I could see that.
Yeah, you're saying that all of the future is encoded in the past, therefore God did it, because God had to give you all the knowledge, right? If you're a super determinist, right? So basically, number one, you're saying God did it. Number 2, you're saying time is emergent, causation is emergent, right? And that you have to have this order. Now you can replace those 4 things with one thing to say time is real. And hey presto, you explain physical reality. There is no time travel. That's a nonsense term, right? Because time is.
You believe that's not possible?
No, it's not possible. It's not possible. You can travel into the future. You can use time dilation. You can use relativity, right?
Yes.
You can use the rules.
You don't think we can go into the past and manipulate because you believe time is actually on a scale unlike physics.
That's just like it's not. It's just not possible. Time is not a thing that you can. It's not a coordinate. It is a non-negotiable process we are all involved in.
Yeah.
And that's where I really love
So you essentially believe in time the way a normal human does.
Yes.
Rather than what the physicists may try to tell us.
Exactly. And I remember in my A-level physics arguing with my physics teacher about time. She said, no, you don't understand time. Time is just about measuring change. And I'm like, but no. Evolution says. And we're just taught this. And I think that the fundamentals of physics and quantum mechanics have a problem.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.